We're here right now at the intermediate LID design. What we're going to talk about today at an intermediate level is the concepts of low impact development and how we would assess a site, how we'll do some of the planning and layout. We'll talk about principles, and then in the afternoon go through the process of applying this to a site. So I wanted to introduce myself and have my co-instructors introduce themselves as well. My name is Jason King. I'm a landscape architect, been practicing for 18 years. Most of my experience has been working on sustainable stormwater, done a lot of green roofs over the years and a lot of site design that incorporates a lot of the principles that we'll talk about today.
Dustin Atchison, I'm from CH2M Hill. I'm kind of one of our LID experts on the West Coast. Spirits of confessions here, I've been doing low impact development since 2002. Mostly on public infrastructure projects, a lot of planning, design, and implementation, so roadway retrofits, facility designs, and also do some teaching with University of Washington and Wazoo's courses, so very excited to work with you today. Thank you.
I'm Curtis Hinman, and I'm a senior scientist with Herrera. As mentioned, I'll be co-presenting. My background, most of you, or many of you may know me from working at WSU as faculty with them for 14 years and I was their LID specialist, the university's LID specialist, and ran a research program there, and now working for Herrera, still doing research, LID research, and I'm the project manager for this for the statewide training program.
One of the things that all of the modules of the series have developed as learning objectives, and mostly the idea is we want to give a good overview of some of the techniques and specific strategies related to site assessment for low impact development. So that's going to talk about looking at sites, looking at soils for areas where we would potentially protect and enhance native vegetation in soils, look at site infiltration, look at some of the strategies to protect trees, place buildings, place roadways, look at how to route utilities. The idea of being able to look at a site and identify opportunities and constraints, and then be able to actually make some decisions to do site design in that way. If you want to know more and you're really interested in this, there is going to be an advanced class of this topic as well. One of the best starting points, I think, when thinking about any sort of low impact development, particularly on site design, is to look at the hydrologic cycle. This becomes really a fundamental way of using nature's way of dealing with stormwater to provide a really good starting point for the decisions that we're going to make as we assess and do site design. So the idea that a natural condition, we have precipitation that's landing on mostly a vegetated condition. So because there's vegetation on the surface of the ground, we have not as much runoff. We have capture of the plant material itself, and then that water is actually evaporated back up into the atmosphere. So you have a lot of evapotranspiration off of the vegetation. What we also have too is because of the high amount of pervious areas, we have lots of infiltration. We have a lot of water that is percolating into the ground, recharging groundwater, and not running off. Contrast this, and this is pretty basic, meeting a pre-development condition and in a developed condition, we start to try to mitigate some of these issues. So we have the same amount of precipitation that's happening, but because of paving and buildings and all of the development activities that we do, we've reduced the impervious surface dramatically. So what that means is we have significantly less infiltration, so less groundwater recharge. That water, because it's not infiltrating, is actually moving through the paved surfaces, collecting pollutants, and then those pollutants, both in terms of high flows and lots of potential pollution, is being transported into adjacent water bodies. So that creates a lot of the conditions that are degrading the ecological function. And then because we've taken what was a predominantly vegetated condition and now reduced the amount of vegetation, we have significantly less evapotranspiration. So we're not necessarily going to go recreate this, but we're going to recreate the functional aspects of some of the pre-development condition as we get into doing development. So one of the things we'll talk about is the techniques to look at how to lay out and do sites that integrate low impact development. So One of the things is low impact development is not necessarily just about stormwater management. It's a toolkit of things that are brought to a project that all interconnect and create benefits for a lot of different things. Reducing the footprint of a building or a development, in this case you see the large tracts of adjacent open space have been protected. So that actually is driven by protecting natural open space, by protecting and restoring ecological function. It also has the benefit of allowing us to have a smaller footprint and to integrate distributed stormwater management throughout. So rather than an end-of-pipe solution with, say, a large facility, we're able to distribute stormwater management throughout. The other thing we've done is reduce the overall building footprint. So we've reduced the overall impact of stormwater management in general. By having a small development footprint, it's less stormwater to manage, and it's easier to manage in that way. And one of the things that we'll look at is the idea that all of the sites have a range of opportunities that can be taken advantage of through the process if there's sort of a careful going through of mapping the existing conditions, looking at what opportunities those are, and then going through a thoughtful design process that aims to protect as many of those resources as possible. If people are asking about low impact development, you can see the difference between what a traditional development looks like and what a low impact development looks like. The idea that it's not a focus on maximizing the footprint of development and creating, you know, the ultimate number of lots and lot size, but there's a trade-off between lot size, existing conditions, and some of the things that are integrated into the site itself. If you look at the two examples up there on the slide, rather than going lot line to lot line and maximizing the footprint, minimizing the disturbance to existing natural systems, reducing impervious area by having smaller lots, narrower drive aisles, being able to reduce the impervious surface overall, and then protecting the native soils and native vegetation on site as well. And then what that does is gives us the opportunity to create opportunities to manage stormwater throughout the site rather than look at directing it to a centralized location. And then the ability potentially to disconnect the impervious surfaces and use the natural areas that are protected for dispersion as a stormwater technique. And then going back to the hydrologic cycle, we're using a lot of strategies, and this is one of the reasons I, as a landscape architect, really appreciate green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure. Is there's a little bit of overlap in the strategies that will provide flow mitigation and water quality, but there's the multiple layers of benefits with green infrastructure. We're infiltrating back into the soils, we're creating filtration and aiding in water quality, providing storage both in groundwater and potentially in ponds and other areas. And then throughout plants, we're providing the opportunity for evaporation and transpiration, restoring the concept of the original water balance in the hydrologic cycle. So what's driving a lot of this is the NPDES permit and the rules that are going to be coming into place depending on the jurisdiction. So you see the areas where regulations are going to start going into effect earlier, the phase 1 communities, and then additional phase 2 communities in Western Washington, and then Eastern Washington is the last part of that. And a little bit of the timeline, additional phase 2 compliance being integrated into local codes. So the low impact development strategies that we'll talk about will start to be integrated into a lot of the codes that we'll see at county, state levels all through the state. You know, we talked about low impact development is not necessarily just about stormwater management, but that's a big part of it. There's not one single strategy that is the silver bullet that's going to work, but that every time you look at a site, you're going to decide between the array of tools that are at your disposal. So if you look at this chart, it gives a little bit about the distinction between certain BMPs that focus on flow control and so reducing the amount of runoff from a site, and then certain that focus on water quality, so the treatment side, and then there's certain strategies if you can integrate them into your site that have both a flow control and a water quality benefit. And we'll talk a little bit about these, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of trainings that have a go into a lot of depth about some of the specifics of those, but as we're talking about site design and assessment, these are some of the tools that we're going to start looking at and being able to integrate.